I've spent a full month now with both the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros. I've spent a huge chunk of my waking hours with these devices over the last few weeks and using them for my actual job worky thing, casual surfing, general computing, and of course, making videos. My overall experience with these machines has been good. So let me tell you about using these MacBook Pros over the last 4 weeks and which one I will ultimately keep as my daily driver. Hey, I'm Jerry, and let me just say right off the top, these MacBook Pros with M1 Max are really good laptops. There's little doubt that these new MacBooks hit all of the right marks that people or professionals wanted from new Pro MacBooks. So let me tell you about my experience using these machines. First off, just to be clear, my experience with these two machines is only with these two machines, and I've not compared them against any other versions of the new MacBook Pros. These machines are both running the same M1 Max CPU with 10-core processor and the 32-core GPU. The 14-inch is running 64 gigabytes of memory and a 2 terabyte SSD, while the 16-inch is running 32 gigabytes of memory and a 1 terabyte SSD. As far as the design of the brand new MacBook Pros, if you're a pro, you're probably going to be pretty happy. Instead of choosing form over function and going with thinner and thinner laptops that has been, the trademark Apple design language for the last few years for the MacBook Pros, they finally went with a case that makes sense for professional use, something that has thermal capacity that can actually take advantage of the big and powerful processors that Apple put inside of here. The design is pretty much just flat all the way across, which is nice. It takes some of the cues from the iPads Pro over the last few years, and of course the iPhone 12 and iPhone 13. But then it rounds and tapers around the edges a little bit just so you can get your fingers underneath it. I think the laser cutout for the MacBook Pro logo on the back is exceptionally well done, even better than it looks like in pictures or videos. So definitely go check that out if you haven't seen it, because that might be the selling point right there. And of course, there's all the ports on the side, which we will get to in just a moment. But coming from a previous generation MacBook Pro, say the 13-inch MacBook Pro or even the 13-inch MacBook Air, you're gonna notice right away the size and the weight difference. The 14-inch is about half a pound heavier than the previous 13-inch MacBook Pro, and the 16-inch MacBook Pro is about half a pound heavier than the previous 16-inch MacBook Pro. And I do wanna point out that if portability is key, obviously you wanna stick to the 14-inch MacBook Pro. The 16-inch MacBook Pro is amazing in a number of ways, and we'll talk about those in just a moment, but it is a little unwieldy at times. It is a large device, so if you need the most power that you can possibly get in a package that doesn't matter what size it is, this is gonna do it for you. My problem with the 16-inch MacBook Pro is when I take it away from my desk. Like for example, I went to go eat lunch downstairs at my kitchen table the other day. I put my food in front of me, I put the laptop on the side of me. The table's rounded, so I had to push the laptop quite a ways away from me just to be able to have it in the same space as my food when I was eating. Now, if I was using the 14-inch, it doesn't have to go nearly as far away, and it's just a little bit easier to use in more confined spaces than the 16-inch MacBook Pro. But both of these computers have that brand new notch. Yep, that guy right up there. But you know what? I'm not gonna spend a whole lot of time on the notch because it's gonna come down to two things. You either figure out how to ignore it pretty quickly, like I did, or it's something that you see as an eyesore every single day and you can't stand it. If that's the case, you probably should steer clear of these new laptops. In my opinion, it's really just added real estate for the menu bar itself. If we didn't have the menu bar and we just had a thicker bezel on top, we would still have a 16:10 screen on the MacBook, either the 14 or the 16-inch. And after using it for a few days, you really just don't notice it, except for some of those wonky things where sometimes the mouse will follow the edge of the notch and sometimes it'll go behind it. Or sometimes it'll act like a teleportation device and the mouse will just shoot from one side to the other, depending on what you're doing. All these little bugs will be worked out, I'm sure, in a short enough period of time. Now, I do want to say something really quick about the Hinge. And as you know, Apple's always paid a lot of attention to detail on little hardware things that most people don't even think about. But the hinges on the new MacBooks are even better than previous MacBooks. It's weird. The first time you open and close the lid, it just has a different type of feeling. It's super hard to explain, but it feels more stable, more solid, and yet it's still so fluid and smooth. And I'm not somebody who sits around opening and closing their laptop all day, but when I do it, it's a weird, enjoyable experience. Anyway, that's it. And this is a camera and microphone test on the brand new 16-inch MacBook Pro. This is a camera and video test on the 14-inch MacBook Pro. Both of these computers got the brand new updated sensor along with the brand new image signal processing built into the new processors on these laptops. I really just wanted to know, is there any difference in quality between these two cameras? And I'm sure there isn't, but like the speakers, there might be some kind of slight difference. Okay, next up is the keyboard, and the keyboard on the new MacBooks is fantastic. It just really is. The new design is all black keys on a double anodized black well, and of course, no more touch bar. So now at the top, we have that full row of actual physical function keys. And yeah, I'm pretty happy about that. I was pretty ambivalent about the touch bar, but having physical keys is just so much better, and they're full height. So now you don't have these little mini keys up the top, you actually get full height keys all the way across and a big old touch sensor. And right below the keyboard, of course, is the trackpad, and Apple trackpads are Apple trackpads. There is no better trackpad, period. The one on the 16-inch is just massive. It's pretty much the size of my hand. And the 14-inch is just a little bit smaller, but still incredibly useful and perfect size for multi-finger gesture swiping. When it comes to the displays of these two new laptops, these are the best displays I've ever used, period. In regular everyday use, I can actually feel the difference with my eyes when looking at these two displays versus previous MacBooks or a 4K display connected to it. These laptops are the first time that Apple had full 2x Retina resolution in the laptops, which makes everything just incredibly sharp and clear. And that refresh rate is just insane because it slows down to a very low rate when you're not doing anything, when something's just sitting on the screen, but then it can ramp up super fast when you're moving things around. And a lot of apps have not been updated for it just yet to be able to take advantage of it. But taking a Finder window and clicking and dragging that window around the screen is just blurring the lines between virtual and physical objects. I love ProMotion displays on the iPad Pro. I don't notice it so much on my iPhone 13 Pro, but I think with the larger screens, you can really see it and really get the full advantage of that super high refresh rate. And if you want to watch a big budget movie with 1600 nits of brightness, then the speakers are definitely going to come in handy as well. The speakers on the 14-inch MacBook Pro are really, really good. Both of these laptops got the brand new 6-speaker system with 2 force-canceling subwoofers on each side and 2 tweeters each. Now, as it turns out, the speakers in the 16-inch MacBook Pro are a bit bigger than the speakers in the 14-inch MacBook Pro. I don't know, physics or something. And although there's only a slight difference between the amount of decibels coming out of these laptops, somewhere around 78, 79 on the 14-inch and somewhere around 82 or so on the 16-inch, the 16-inch sounds a lot more full than the 14-inch. That's not to say that the speakers in the 14-inch are bad in any way. They're still great, but with the 16-inch, holy crap, this could absolutely be your only speaker system on most desks, and you would probably be just fine with it. You can use it for listening to music, watching movies, like I said, or doing audio work, and you're gonna get a nice, clear, full sound out of the 16-inch MacBook Pro. So yes, Apple brought back ports to the MacBook Pros. We now get a headphone jack and 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports on the left-hand side, along with MagSafe, which we'll get to. And then on the right side, you have an SD card slot, a Thunderbolt 4 port, and an HDMI out. As somebody who does plug things into computers on a pretty regular basis, I'm pretty happy to have those ports, and I think a lot of people will too. I think the SD card, in my case, is the biggest advantage to having the new MacBook Pros because I use SD cards for everything. I use it for that. I use it for that. I use it for my audio. And obviously the bigger advantage is if you're not at your desk and you need an SD card slot, you don't need to carry a dongle anymore for that. So, yay. And as I mentioned a moment ago, MagSafe is back. Yes, MagSafe, baby, woo! Except, after using it for a few days, I'm not sure that I care. The benefit, obviously, of MagSafe is that it can connect to the computer, it self-aligns, and if somebody trips over the cable or whatever, it'll disconnect and not take your laptop with it. Apple also added the ability for fast charging these laptops. If you get the 96-watt charger for the 14-inch or the 140-watt charger for the 16-inch, you can fast charge your laptop 50% in like 30 minutes. But I guess after all of these years of not having MagSafe, the problem with having MagSafe again is this MagSafe cable. Almost everywhere I go now, I have USB-C or Thunderbolt chargers available to charge my laptops. If I am sitting at my desk, I have a Thunderbolt dock that I connect to the laptop and it charges. If I go on a trip, do I really want to take another cable with me? I'm finally at the point where I can travel with all of my devices and take one type of cable to charge all of them, especially when I can even charge my iPhone with a USB-C cable using this Anker magnetic wireless charger. And I don't know that I really want to mess with taking another type of cable just for one device anymore. So I'm probably gonna roll this back up and stick it back in the box, and I don't think that I'll be using MagSafe. But that's just me. Let me know what you guys think about MagSafe below. Performance-wise, both of these computers are performance beasts, and I'm not gonna go too much into benchmarks in this video. I've already done that when I did the 16-inch benchmarks. But looking at Geekbench, the 16-inch MacBook Pro edges out the 14-inch in both single and multi-core CPU tests. But the 14-inch did a little bit better in graphics tests, probably because of that 64 gigabytes of RAM versus 32, and got a metal score of about 68,000 versus about 65,000. And that was about the same for my Unigine Heaven test, which shows that the 14-inch with 64 gigs of RAM edged out the 32 gigabyte 16-inch. So it seems that the higher RAM can help out a little bit with GPU intensive tasks. In my Final Cut Pro test, exporting about a 10-minute video with multicam 4K video, the 16-inch MacBook Pro completed that test in 4 minutes flat versus the 14-inch with 64 gigabytes of RAM that completed it in 3 minutes and 52 seconds. But compared to the 6 minutes and 30 seconds of the M1 MacBook Pro, that's a bit of a surprise to me. I was actually expecting a much bigger difference between these M1 Max processors with 32 GPU cores and the built-in encoders over the M1 MacBook Pro with no special video encoders and just 8 GPU cores. At 4 times the GPU and about 4 times the cost of the M1 MacBook Pro, I was kind of expecting something around 4 times the performance. The SSDs in these new MacBook Pros are also crazy fast. At this point, these SSDs are so fast that I don't think it really matters which one you get. You just need to get the size that you want. As far as speed, there's nothing you can't do. I don't think you're gonna have any bottlenecks from applications with either of these SSDs. When it comes to the memory, 32 gigabytes in the 16-inch versus 64 in the 14-inch. In my regular daily use of doing work and browsing the web and editing videos, I saw absolutely zero difference between these two configurations. The only time I saw a difference was running those benchmarks like Geekbench that actually really pushed the GPU cores, and in those instances, the 64 gigabytes of RAM had a little bit of an advantage over the 32. As far as heat and fans, the 14-inch does run a bit hotter than the 16-inch. They're both running the same M1 Max processor with 32 GPU cores, and the 14-inch is always about 10 degrees warmer than the 16-inch. So as you can see from the screen recording, the 14-inch is just doing regular computing stuff, but if you look up at the top, we're hovering in the low 50s degrees Celsius, and the fans are running at around 2400 RPM. And this is extremely common that the 14-inch is running a little bit warm and the fans turn on. Not to a level that you actually hear them, but they are turning on pretty frequently in just regular everyday use. The 16-inch, on the other hand, pretty much never turns its fans on in regular daily use, and always stays about 10 degrees Celsius cooler compared to the 14-inch. And that's not just inside the computer. Everything on the 14-inch stays a little bit warmer. So the handrest, the trackpad, the keyboard, all of it is just a little bit warm to the touch pretty much all the time. Whereas the 16-inch is pretty much nice and cool anytime you touch it. Now, when it comes to battery life, Apple says you can get up to 14 hours of wireless web browsing with the 16-inch MacBook Pro and up to 11 hours of wireless web browsing on the 14-inch. I mean, both of those are a far cry from the 17 hours of wireless web browsing from the 13-inch MacBook Pro. And I think that's a better battery test indicator than Apple claiming, oh, we get 21 hours of watching a movie on a loop on the 16-inch MacBook Pro. In my daily, regular use of using these computers for my regular work stuff, for web surfing, for creating documents, for email, and maybe even a little bit of video editing, I can get through a full day easily on either one of these laptops. At the end of that day, this 16-inch will have more battery left over. That's just how it is. And if you go with something like the M1 Pro instead of the M1 Max, you'll have a little bit more on either device. But I guess my point is, as a professional laptop, these are still good enough to get you through a whole day of regular professional work. If you're doing crazy graphics rendering, then no, you're not gonna get 14 or 11 hours of use. You're gonna get, 4. But that's probably more than you would get with any previous laptop. So battery life is pretty good. Okay, so when I look at all of this, after using these two computers over the last month, I think I know which MacBook I want to use as my daily driver. For my usage only, which is work applications and browsing and general computing and making videos, either of these devices can more than handle what I'm going to throw at it. So the slight performance differences based on size of the laptop or amount of memory make no difference to me. The 16-inch MacBook Pro is such an amazing device. With its larger screen and louder speakers, it's probably the best screen period I have ever used. But the larger footprint does make me hesitate when I take this thing off my desk to go use on the couch or a kitchen table or whatever. The 14-inch is a great size that offers a bigger screen than my previous MacBook Pro while still remaining fairly portable, but it runs a little warm just in regular use. And although I don't generally hear the fans, it does bug me a bit that they're running pretty frequently. All else being the same with the keyboard and the notch and the new ports, I think that the size of the 16-inch MacBook Pro is just not what I want right now. So it's out. As far as the 14-inch with the M1 Max configuration, I just don't see the performance benefit with my workload. But what I do see every time I use it is higher temperatures and probably a hit to battery life. So it's out. I think that what I really want is a MacBook Air, M1 Pro, or even just a plain old M1 with 32 gigabytes of memory, because in my regular use, the 16 gigabytes was my limiting factor. But because I do what I do and I always want the newest thing, I've decided to place a new order for a 14-inch 10-core M1 Pro with 16-core GPU and 32 gigabytes of memory and a 2 terabyte SSD. And I think that that will hit the sweet spot for me. It's probably the perfect balance between performance and portability for my regular use. But hey, what do you guys think? Are you someone who needs the M1 Max, or would you be content with just an M1 with more memory? Let me know below. Hit the thumbs up button if you want to see a follow-up when I get that new M1 Pro. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it, and I'll see you next time.